John Roese, EMC's role within the enterprise sector is very well known. Perhaps less so, though, is your involvement with mobile service providers.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously our history has been, the leading supplier of storage systems to enterprises. But, if you weren't paying attention to us for the last several years, we've gone out and done a number of strategic acquisitions. A number of years ago, we bought a company called VMware. People thought that was a strange acquisition. Turned out to be a fairly good acquisition. It's now the leader in virtualization in data centers. We bought a company called RSA, which most people recognize, one of the leading security companies. We acquired technology companies like Greenplum, which are one of the leaders in big data and analytics frameworks. And so what's very interesting is as we have accumulated those assets, clearly the first place we applied them was to enterprise, but there's an interesting thing happening. The telco environment, the service provider environment, is now facing a transition where it's no longer about just moving bits across a wire or building transmission infrastructure or voice infrastructure. It's about participating in the full IT experience, and in order to do that, they need to have access to new tools and new technologies. Ironically, those tools and technologies are robust storage and information processing capability, virtualization technology, advanced analytical security, big data and analytics technology, which seems like an optimal time for EMC to make its presence known and start to engage more formally with the service provider world. And so far, we've been here for 2 days and the response has been fantastic. People are genuinely, they know who we are, they were surprised to see us. When they understand what we're doing, they get very excited because we're filling a need that, quite frankly, the traditional service provider ecosystem doesn't really have the armament to deal with right now.
So you've made a number of key acquisitions recently. Is there an overarching strategic goal to all of this?
Yeah, well, there were two themes. The first theme was that we believed that, from production to storage and infrastructure to consumption of information was important, and we wanted to own as much of that as possible as a platform provider. So obviously virtualizing the data center is a big evolution of the platform. Acquiring scale-out storage and new technologies is a big piece of the platform story. Having core assets in security where information is created and processed is a big piece, and obviously big data and analytics sits on top of all of it. So that was the first big theme that kind of justified the major acquisitions. The second piece is that we had a vision that said, over time, many of these traditional silos, if you will, are going to transform into becoming more software-based services. And so we have a term we use called the software-defined data center. And what it says is everything from the network to the storage infrastructure to the compute infrastructure to even the applications and services is going to decouple from hardware and become much more of a virtualized software-oriented service. And so our big theme today is, as you look at each of the divisions, whether it be storage transforming into more of a software architecture, virtualization clearly becoming more software-oriented, if not entirely, and even things like security becoming much more of a software and analytical processing problem than a hardware issue. They're still hardware, but the hardware is now decoupled from the software, and it's happening across all of these dimensions. So the choice of acquisitions we made weren't to just randomly enter these markets, it was to prepare us for this evolution towards a more software-oriented future.
What's changing within service providers' businesses that is leading them to rethink their approach and look at new ways of handling this growth in data?
Well, there's many answers to that. One of the most foundational ones is, obviously the service provider ecosystem is under tremendous pressure in terms of CapEx and OpEx, and the economic models are changing. And so if we look at what's happened in the enterprise world, which happened a little bit in advance of the service provider world, where high degrees of virtualization and software orientation emerged, what we saw were utilizations of servers go from 20% on average to 90%. We saw CapEx reduce dramatically. We saw time to roll out an application like in EMC's own data centers went from months to literally hours, and all of that had profound impact on freeing up capital to invest in new areas. If that sounds like a pretty consistent theme, I think everyone here is trying to wrestle with that. So clearly those technologies, as we apply them into service provider worlds, are actually very applicable. That's number one. Number two is that the service providers are realizing that one of their most important but not monetized assets right now is information. They are the keeper of tremendous amounts of information about the behavior of the ecosystem ecosystem, the environment, the way the users are behaving, what's going on in terms of transactions and activity, not so much from a Big Brother perspective, but basically to better target advertising or services or healthcare or retail. And while we've tried several times to do that as a service provider ecosystem, it was always very tactical. We weren't using the state-of-the-art tools. And so now what is happening is the service providers are realizing they need more advanced tools, and those tools are coming out of places like the enterprise financial services market, applying those technologies into the carrier world. The big data world, which originated in places other than service provider, but now are becoming very interesting for the service providers as a new path to revenue and monetization. So I know we've heard this all before, but when we tried to monetize the contextual intelligence of the service provider in the past, we tried to do it with service provider technology. This time it's very different because we're actually doing it with information technology that's coming from actually very radically different ecosystems, and to be perfectly honest, is much more optimized to actually take advantage of that. So there's a bit of a learning curve, and there's definitely a bit of an introductory phase, but I think the response I've seen has been quite good because people realize, to quote Albert Einstein, the definition of lunacy is to do the same thing in the same way and expect different results. In this case, it's the definition of lunacy is to do the same thing with the same tools and expect the same result or different results. We're changing the tool set, we're changing the ecosystem, and we actually hope that this time around we'll actually be able to monetize these assets and really participate in the IT ecosystem.
Is this an approach that mobile service providers can gradually introduce into their businesses, or must it all be done at once?
Absolutely. In fact, actually, the service provider infrastructure is one of the biggest assets. And so when we start talking to service providers, what we realized is, good God, don't get rid of your information or the tools that capture your information. Just figure out ways to aggregate it. There are tremendous amounts of insight coming out of the radio access network, out of the optical infrastructure, the subscriber management systems, but what's missing is an incrementalization of that in which we pull all of that information together. So I would tell you that the sunk cost, the investment in the infrastructure and the IT systems are actually huge assets. There are incremental tools and capabilities that pull all of that together and then allow you to better process it. So in reality, we're not saying throw away the telco infrastructure. We're saying it's a huge asset, and if you didn't have it, you wouldn't even have this dialogue. But as you add to it using more contemporaneous tools on top of it, you suddenly get a chance to unlock those capabilities in an interesting way. So it's very much what I call a disruptive evolution, not a complete revolution and throw it away and start over, which I think is very resonant because I don't think if we told people here to start over, we'd get a very good audience. So,
John Roese, thank you very much indeed.
Absolutely. Thanks very much.